This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. We begin today's show looking at the European Union elections, which saw centrist parties losing dozens of seats while far-right and Green candidates made significant strides. In France, the far-right National Rally Party, led by Marine Le Pen, narrowly defeated the centrist alliance led by French President Emmanuel Macron. In Britain, the Brexit Party, led by Nigel Farage, came in first with 31% of the vote. The ruling Tory party placed fifth. The elections came soon after Prime Minister Theresa May announced her resignation. In Italy, the far-right Nationalist League party placed first, winning 34% of the vote. The party is led by Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini.
Not only is the League the first party in Italy, but Marine Le Pen is the first party in France. In the UK, Nigel Farage is the first. So Italy, France, England, it's the sign of a Europe that is changing.
While right-wing euroskeptic parties slightly increased their power in the European Union Assembly, about 75% of voters still back parties that support Europe. Traditional center-left and center-right parties suffered broad defeats, but the Green Party soared in popularity in many nations, especially Germany, where it placed second. Greens also did well in Finland, France, and Ireland. The next president of the European Commission will likely be Bas Eickhout of the Dutch Green Party.
We have been campaigning on climate action, social justice and democracy. So those three topics will also be at the negotiation table from a Green perspective, and we will make our demands there, and we will make very clear that any new president of the Commission needs to come very clear on these topics and deliver change.
To talk more about the European Parliament elections, we're joined by three guests. David Adler is policy coordinator for the Democracy in Europe movement, or DiEM25. He's joining us from Athens, Greece, where Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has called for snap elections. In London, Paul Mason is with us, author, filmmaker, contributing writer at The New Statesman. Mason's most recent book is titled Clear, Bright Future, A Radical Defense of the Human Being. And in Germany, we're joined by Luisa Neubauer. She's a 23-year-old member of the German Green Party. She brought the climate protest to Germany, which Greta Thunberg had initiated in Sweden, protesting outside the Swedish parliament. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Let's begin. We will begin right now by talking to David Adler. David Adler is in Athens, Greece. Talk about the significance of the European Parliament, especially, I think, for a U.S. audience. There isn't an understanding of a transnational governing body, what the European Parliament means, and then what the surge of the Green Party means, and also the surge of nationalist parties as well, though they didn't do as well as people feared.
Sure. So I think it's crucial to put these European Parliament elections in context. This is the world's second largest exercise of democracy after India's. 400 million voters across 28 countries competing for this European Parliament, where there are 751 MEPs in total. But, you know, the stakes of this are really who can speak for Europe, who has the platform to speak on behalf of Europe, and for which Europe they're going to speak. I think one of the main takeaways from this election is that politics in Europe are Europeanizing. For years, pundits hailed the rise or the return of the nation state, and they pointed to the European Union as evidence of that. So we saw Brexit, we saw Frexit, Grexit, Italexit, and so on. In the last 3 years, almost all these calls have gone silent. And all of these programs, even Marine Le Pen, who asked people to call her Miss Frexit, have scrubbed their programs of references to exiting the European Union. And what that means is that, but you know, we've seen a fortification of the European Union on the outside. Namely, there's no more calls for exit, but we've seen an intensification of competition for grabbing power from the inside. So this is what we would call, the transnationalization of politics. And there's real promise here as well as real perils. On the promise side, Democracy in Europe movement, DiEM25, we were born to fight for transnational politics that didn't say, I'm German against the Greeks, I'm Greeks against the Germans, North against South, East against West, but built a kind of pan-European vision. And we're seeing that in the uptick in voter turnout, as you mentioned in the intro, we're seeing a real investment in this thing called European politics. And that's fantastic because there's a recognition that many of the most important issues of our day, namely climate change, migration, these issues will not be solved at nation-state level. That's why we're pushing for things like a Green New Deal for Europe, which we hope the new Commission can introduce as a way of binding European countries together, building an energy union, and transforming the European economy in the process. Now, to the perils. You mentioned the gains made by the far right, and there too we're seeing a kind of transnationalization of the far right. No longer are these people fighting individual fights, they're banding together, as we would have seen at this rally in Milan when Salvini, who scored upwards of 30% in the vote, brought all these characters together. And they're doing well to put aside their differences to fight together. And the danger there is that the same pathologies we once associated with the nation-state, an exclusive nationalism, a xenophobia, are just scaling up now and becoming exclusive Europeanism. So people like Salvini, people like Marine Le Pen, they may not be talking about the greatness of France or Italy in particular, but saying, I believe in a white Christian Europe. So, we're seeing this big battle over who can speak for Europe and whether that's going to be an exclusive all-white Europe or a much more progressive Europe with climate justice at its heart.
Well, but David Adler, on this issue of the attacks on immigrants and the vision of a white Christian Europe, what about the fact that the biggest countries are precisely the ones, France, Italy, Britain, that have had the surge of this right-wing vote? And also, aren't many of the centrist parties, the center-left and center-right parties, increasingly kowtowing to the anti-immigrant fervor across the continent?
Absolutely. And I think there's a real misunderstanding about what we might call the nature of the far right. So in the run-up to the elections, we saw a lot of panic about this, especially in the American press. There was a sense that Steve Bannon was lurking under the covers, building a kind of transnational movement. And when that failed to materialize, as it failed to end up with a sweeping coup in European Parliament in terms of far-right parties all across Europe, many commentators are now sneering and saying, there's no mandate for the far right. But I think this puts the bar for optimism way too low. The goal shouldn't be to stave off a surge in the far right. It should be to guarantee a purge of those parties, to make sure that they have no place in our politics. People are saying, for example, it's okay, Nigel Farage, he won about the same votes he won in 2014. Same with Marine Le Pen. That's not the point. There's no healthy politics that permits these far-right parties to even maintain and deepen their grip on these institutions. And so I think we should be deeply terrified, not only that they are still hanging around and capturing even more vote share, but precisely that they're winning the war of ideas. I mean, you're exactly right when you say that parties, even left-wing parties, in places like Denmark, in places like France, are sort of developing a consensus around the need to build a fortress around Europe and prevent the entry of migrants. And so then you have to ask yourself the question, who needs the far right when the liberals will do their job for them?
I wanted to bring Luisa Neubauer into this conversation, speaking to us from Germany. You have Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, the CDU, technically coming in first, but it tumbled to a historic low of 28%. And you have the Green Party, your party, doubling at the same time. The Green Party surging to 22% of the vote and coming in second. First, I wanted to turn to Sven Giegold, co-leader of the Green Party.
Climate protection and the strengthening of European solidarity must be on the agenda now. Instead of further blockades in Europe by the grand coalitions, we need a joint new start for Europe. Therefore, we stand for topics related to European policies in climate protection and for European agricultural transition, but also for investments into joint European projects. Like France now, the German government has to come up with an ambitious concept for a new start in Europe.
So that is the co-head of the Green Party. Luisa Neubauer, you're being referred to as the Greta Thunberg of Germany. Talk about the climate protests that you brought to Germany as a member of the German Green Party.
So yes, we have been striking for the climate in Germany for 22 weeks in a row now. So we started in December 2018. The Friday that Greta was giving her speech at the UN climate conference in Poland, we started off this climate movement in Germany. And it skyrocketed in a sense. So ever since, we've been increasing strikes, increasing the number of students on the streets almost every week. By now, we are active in 500 cities across the country. Yes, and striking every Friday again and again. On March 15th, it was a global climate strike. We brought 300,000 students on the streets in Germany. And so did we just last week on Friday, the Friday before the European elections, when we particularly striked for the European elections and brought 320,000 students on the street, demanding all voters to go and vote for democratic parties, to oppose the move towards right nationalism, and also to vote for the climate and to vote for parties that are actually able and willing to bring climate politics on the agenda of the European Union.
And what do you hope to do now with the mandate that the Greens have gotten now in Germany? What do you expect would happen?
Well, the Green Party Germany, they have a big job to do now. Their expectations are huge. They got 33% of the votes of first voters across the country, which means that every third person has been voting for the first time, 18-year-old, for instance. They trusted the Green Party to actually bring climate and all other demands of young people into the climate and into the politics of the European Union, which is a tough job. So the Green Party is quite aware, I believe, of that job, of that mandate, and we now expect really them to act and to push the European Parliament toward climate action. Because as we know, the European Parliament needs to double its ambitions to reach a climate Paris Agreement, meaning they need to drastically reduce emissions in a much faster rate than currently planned and currently outlined, meaning we need a strong climate coalition among the parties represented in the European Parliament, pushing for stronger action, which only works if, obviously, the 28 and then soon 27 EU member states are willing to push as well in their respected countries. This is one reason why the Christian Democrats, the current ruling party in Germany, has lost tremendously in this election. They talk about European solutions. They try to kind of get out of national commitments by referring to Europe, though we know that once in Brussels, it's a Christian Democrat, it's Angela Merkel and her party that are blocking climate action on a European level. So we need European green parties across all countries to push conservatives, to push climate blockers in the European Parliament and nudge them towards actual action.
I want to turn to the Dutch politician Bas Eickhout, one of the leaders of the European Greens. In April, he thanked the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg for addressing the European Parliament.
When we are, in July, going to vote on the new president of the European Commission, and a lot of you will come back, everyone hopes, I hope that everyone will remember this day, when we were applauding Greta Thunberg for her speech, talking about that the world is at stake. But that also means that we have then to look at the program of the new European Commission, whether they really want to change policies. Policies to phase out coal, policies to put a real price on carbon, policies to make aviation really pay, policies to make sure that the European budget doesn't pay 1 cent to fossil fuels, policies that is really greening our agriculture, which we have not done until now.
So that's Bas Eichhout, who's being talked about as the possible next head of the European Commission. Luisa Neubauer, when you talk about solutions and talk about German solutions, first, are you going to be in the European Parliament, you yourself? And also, what are those solutions that you're demanding that you feel that Merkel's party and the other centrists have not touched?
Well, I don't think I'm going to be in the European Parliament, maybe in 10 years' time, but not now, not anytime soon. What we're seeing is that as students across Germany, we brought climate on the agenda. Within 5 months, we've transformed the political dialogue in Germany and actually dominated the political discussions in the Bundestag. People talk about climate, and voters stated that it was a #1 priority in those elections. And I feel it's tremendously important, and we will keep on pushing. We are realizing every day more and more that we need those actions on the street. We need the society to really demand climate action, otherwise politicians won't act. Hence, when talking of solutions, we demand the German government in particular to get to quit coal power. Germany is a European leader in coal power. It's the dirtiest kind of energy, and it's ruining any climate balance there is. We are not reaching our own national climate goals because of those coal power plants across the country, and we don't need them. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We are technologically far off, and we have all means and possibilities to phase out coal power plants. Secondly, we also demand Germany to quit fossil fuel subsidies, which is crucial. It's ridiculous that millions of euros are flowing into the fossil fuel industry, while we all know they're the last ones who need it, and they're the only ones profiting from the climate crisis we're in. And we're also asking the government to introduce a carbon tax, which has been tremendously successful at many European countries, and it's also something that is highly recommended by thousands of scientists, which call themselves Scientists for Future, and are officially backing up the Fridays for Future movement in Germany and stating that our demands are right and just and feasible, and that our demand for rapid climate action is legitimate.
As we continue to look at the EU elections, we turn to the results in the United Kingdom, where the Brexit party, led by Nigel Farage, came in first with 31% of the vote. The ruling Tory party placed fifth. The elections came soon after Prime Minister Theresa May announced her resignation. Farage spoke to reporters after the elections.
This is a vote that says, put no-deal Brexit back on the table, make it part of our negotiations, because without that you've got no chance of getting a sensible free trade deal. And I want us, as the Brexit party, to be engaged in that. But it's also a vote that says the 31st of October is the next really big day in this process. If we don't leave on that day, then you can expect the Brexit party to repeat this kind of surprise in the next general election.
Well, we're joined now by Paul Mason, a contributing writer for The New Statesman, author and filmmaker. Mason's most recent book is titled Clear, Bright Future, A Radical Defense of the Human Being. Welcome to Democracy Now! I wanted to ask you...
It's great to be here.
The Conservatives not only came in fifth, but the Labour Party came in fourth in these elections. And you had the phenomena of a relatively new party winning such a huge portion of the vote for representation in the European Union. Your sense of what happened here to both the Conservatives and to Labour?
Okay, I mean, following on from what was said earlier in the programme, the first thing we have to recognise is that the general phenomenon in Europe of the right wing not making the far right not making a surge, but the centre right, so our Conservatives, the equivalent of your Republicans, are losing their ideological defences against the far right's ideology. So they're switching their policies and their rhetoric towards exactly the terrain that the far right has been setting for the last 10 years. So in Britain, the local version of that happening was all exacerbated by the failure of Brexit to happen. So we had a referendum 3 years ago. People voted narrowly to leave the European Union, but it didn't happen because no form of leaving was acceptable to the people who want it to happen. Now, as a result, our Prime Minister in the building behind me has resigned on Friday, and in this sense that the Brexit Party was able to come from nowhere in 6 weeks and take 30% of the vote because so many conservative members and activists and voters in Britain, really all they want is this xenophobic right-wing project of Brexit. Now, the Brexit Party itself had no policies, it has no membership structure, it's controlled by one man as a private company, but many of the candidates were the classic cast of characters. They are climate deniers, hostile to gay sexuality. Some of them believe it is disgusting. They are, of course, anti-abortion. They are pro-fossil fuel. Many of them work in the fossil fuel industry. So it is a tragedy that 30% of the people of my country who bothered to turn out, it was 17% of the electorate as a whole, 30% of the turnout voted for Farage and his party because, in a way, centrist, sort of liberal centrist conservatism no longer has the answers to a country like this, which is racked with what you already have. We're just in the middle of an unannounced culture war.
This is British Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn addressing reporters shortly after the election.
The priority at the moment, I think, is for this government to call for a general election and actually have a general election so we can decide the future. It has no majority in Parliament, it has no legislative programme, and Parliament is basically been given nothing to do by the government. I think that is a demand that should be made and made as strongly as possible. John has also pointed out, and I support this, that any final deal has to be put to a public vote, and that we're prepared to do, and indeed support it.
Well, that was Jeremy Corbyn. So, Paul Mason, what happened to Labour then, which I think registered in the single digits in this vote?
Well, they got 14%, and its vote at the start, 6 weeks ago at the start of the campaign, was on 34%. So what happened is that about half of its vote went to the Liberal Democrats, almost another half went to the Green Party, and about 1 in 4 voters went to the Brexit Party. So these are working class white communities where they're attracted by this new right phenomenon. So the problem that Corbyn had was that he'd been trying to make a pitch to voters that, look, we're all sick of Brexit. There are working class people, there are progressive people on both sides. Let's come together around a programme about everything except Brexit, you know, the economic transformation of this country, climate change, democracy. But the voters just didn't want to hear that. Progressive voters in this country know they are in a culture war. They wanted a party that was prepared to speak, as, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does in your Congress, from the heart about the values. And Corbyn couldn't bring himself to do that. And as a result, the activists I'm a member of that party, we have 500,000 members. The activists just didn't turn out. They were confused, they were discouraged. And the real problem for Corbyn is, you know, this is a multi-party election. Our general election for the Parliament is a two-party election. It would be Corbyn's real problem is, what if the Greens end up, as they are in the rest of Europe, as a permanent alternative left force?
Mm-hmm. And what do you think that the left, that Labour, should do now? Corbyn is saying that he supports a second referendum on any Brexit deal.
Yes, but he's not saying how the party would vote in that referendum. And to me and to many of my left-wing colleagues in the Labour Party, it is urgent that Corbyn, like many of his team, is prepared to commit overtly to Labour having the policy of stopping Brexit. You know, Brexit is the project of the right. It is a project of xenophobia. It will collapse our economy. And what is more, all the problems, all the grievances against Muslims, against black people, against gays, don't go away just because Brexit happens. Because as the failure mounts, as the economy slides, then these same right-wing forces will be saying, now we know who's the problem. We now know who's at fault because Brexit didn't work. They'll be targeting the minorities again. So we have to stop it. Jeremy Corbyn, I'm afraid, I'm a supporter of his. I remain a supporter. He doesn't get it. He didn't get it for 6 weeks. He's getting it now because large numbers of the Labour Party are saying, look, we're not just losing votes, we're losing activists to an alternative left force. And let's face it, you just heard it from our German colleague, the wind is in the sails of Green parties. They have a utopia, and it's a good utopia, of a Green New Deal and a Europe of tolerance. And And we, in part, in the Labour movement, we are clinging to our industrial heartlands. There, it is very tough to convince people, for example, where the coal mines were closed down, that environmental politics are the right thing. It's just the same as, for example, in West Virginia in the States. But we have to have that argument, and I am currently engaged in a fight to bring Labour back to that core position of a tolerant society, of an internationalist outlook, and, of course, the Green New Deal, which I think is where we could agree with the Green parties, both here in the UK and in the European Parliament, should Britain, of course, be staying in Europe.
David Adler in Athens, Greece, you're policy coordinator for Democracy in Europe movement, DiEM25, working with Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece. You're a little less optimistic about what's happening with the Green Party. Can you talk about that? And also, how did Yanis Varoufakis himself fare? Didn't he run twice in Germany with the Greens and in Greece in the European Parliament elections?
So I'll take each one of those questions in turn. The first question, this has been described as a green wave, and I think, all the activism that has been done around Fridays for Future and demanding that, climate get on the agenda is extremely important, and all this work is extremely admirable because it signals the arrival of climate politics to Europe. I mean, there is no party now who can claim not to have a plan around the climate. Even Marine Le Pen is speaking about environmentalism as patriotism, as a way of fulfilling the French nationalist dream. And I think that suggests a real danger here. In the United States, we're so used to a polarization of the climate debate. You're a right-wing and you're a climate denier, or you're left-wing and you accept the climate, but you also accept various elements of the justice agenda that go along with it. In Europe, there's a much broader scope of what's possible under the umbrella of green politics. And this is very, very dangerous, because it means that there's a lot of room for co-optation. I think that there's been a lot of optimism around the constructive ambiguity of a Green New Deal, right? We can throw many of our dreams and many of our best policies inside of that big idea, but there's a real danger there. When you've got people like Michel Barnier, who are chief bureaucrats and members of the center-right, who are speaking about the need for an EU Green New Deal, that's fantastic. But it cannot be just about carbon taxes. It cannot be just about coal divestment. It has to be part of a broader transformative vision. And I think that, here the onus is on the Green Party. If they're going to be the primary beneficiaries of this swing towards climate politics, they've got to lead in demanding a Green New Deal for Europe. This is precisely what was at the core of DiEM25's program, of our coalition called European Spring. We were trying to hack this to build a transnational movement for a Green New Deal for Europe, because the worst thing that could happen is that the Green New Deal ends up as a series of small technocratic fixes instead of a real transformative vision that brings people together. In the same way that when the left betrays its principles and implements things like austerity, as Syriza has done here and is now reaping the bitter harvest of its failures with the Greek people. So if the Greens fail to deliver a proper transformative vision for green politics that brings along working class people, I promise you it will take the sails out of the green agenda as well and put further fuel into the far right. Now, you asked me about how Yanis and I in our movement fared. I think it's crucial to contextualize that in a broader night of sort of how did the left fare, putting the Labour Party also into context. You mentioned in the intro these really tragic, narrow losses for Ada Colau and Manuela Carmena in Spain. I think it's crucial to kind of get a grip on what really is happening with the left. There's a really, there's reasons to be cheerful in this election and reasons to be depressed. Now, when I speak about our transnational movement, we tried something a bit crazy, which was to forego traditional party structures, forego their traditional party base, and all the resources that flow from the public coffers, and try to build something new and transnational. And we're very proud of the progress we were able to make with that, even if we fell short. In the case here, in the case of Greece, they're telling us now that we fell 0.01% below the threshold to enter European Parliament. So we're still working through it. But let's talk for a second about the broader sort of annihilation of the left. I mean, this applies to us, it applies to the Labour Party, it applies to Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, it applies to Die Linke in Germany. What happened here? I think what happened here is two crucial things. One is the left failed to ground the climate question in the social justice one. We failed to grip that climate question and say there will be no green transition without an economic transition that ends austerity. And you look at the way that Bess Eckhout is talking about climate, does he mention austerity? Does he mention the suffering sweeping through southern Europe at the hands of the Troika? No, he doesn't. So that was failure number one. Failure number two, though, that we have to grapple with is the problem of fragmentation. I think in the US, we've gotten used to a two-party system, a Democratic Party that necessarily builds a broad church and forces liberals to fight with leftists, to fight with all sorts of other types. And they have to arrive at some consensus, or they don't, but they will usually stand behind one candidate. Europe's party structures means there's basically infinite room for fragmentation, infinite room for egos on the left to split up between each other, and infinite room for the left to pick up on minor differences and let itself lose its place as speaking with one voice on behalf of workers and their families across Europe. So this is really our challenge. I mean, the far right have shown time and again that when it comes down to the crunch time, they're willing to band together, put forward a single vision, put aside their differences, and say, you know what? Let's speak together on behalf of an all-white, anti-Islam, anti-immigrant Europe. And the left simply was not able to do that. It was not able to capitalize on the waves of activism emerging across Europe around the climate question.
We just have 30 seconds.
Serious soul searching.
We just have 30 seconds, but I wanted to ask Paul Mason: is milk shaking the new form of resistance? The milk shaking of throwing milkshakes at people like Nigel Farage and other right-wing leaders.
In my day, it was a harder form of resistance, but now the rule of law must prevail. So milkshaking is, and the good thing is, of course, that the single overt American dollar-funded fascist who did try to stand, Tommy Robinson, he has a massive following all over the world among the real alt-right. He got milkshaked, but more importantly, he completely failed. He lost his electoral deposit. The people of Northwest England rejected him en masse.
Finally, Trump is coming for a state visit. The entire Trump family going to be meeting supposedly with Prince Charles, who has said that climate change is his #1 issue. What do you expect to come out of this, and will there be mass protests in the streets?
There will be, of course, mass protests, but the important thing is that we don't have a government. The Prime Minister is a zombie, not a literal zombie. She's zombified. The government the Conservative government is tearing itself apart. Any idea that this is a kind of victory lap for Trump in Britain is wrong. Of course, his political allies, the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage, will be there to welcome him. But we are a progressive country. We have a progressive majority, even now in the United Kingdom, anti-racist. Many of our cities, very, very culturally integrated, and London, when he comes, will certainly turn out to protest him, and the message will be the same as last time. He is not welcome. He is seen through. Everything he says stirs the distaste and division that we just don't want, I think, in the United Kingdom, nor in the rest of Europe. So, yep, you are not welcome, President Trump. Go away.
Well, we're going to leave it there. But, of course, we'll continue to follow this issue. Paul Mason, New Statesman, contributing writer, author, filmmaker. His most recent book, Clear, Bright Future, A Radical Defense of the Human Being. And David Adler, thanks for joining us from Athens, Greece, policy coordinator for DiEM25. That's Democracy in Europe movement. When we come back, a billionaire announces he'll pay the student debt of the entire graduating class, almost 400 students of the historically black college Morehouse in Atlanta. We'll speak with one of those students, and we'll talk to the former head of the NAACP, Ben Jealous. Stay with us.